a bit down, fearing she might not have a role to play and be left out. Scroll reassured her, mentioning how His Highness had never treated any witch differently in the border town. Hummingbird joined the conversation. Many of them had nothing else to do besides their work, but His Highness had provided them with ample leisure playtime and a lot of freedom. As the dinner approached its end, the prince suddenly clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. The first item to be served was baijiu, which had a richer flavor than beer or fruit wine and was more intoxicating. Therefore, underage witches were not allowed to partake. 3 glasses were placed in front of Evelyn, crystal clear and transparent. Each contained a different drink. One glass was colorless, resembling pure water, the second had a milky white hue, and the last one shimmered with a bright orange color. Evelyn's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. She picked up the glass containing the orange-colored drink and took a sip. Just as His Highness had described, the taste of baijiu was much stronger than beer, even slightly throat-stinging. Her taste buds detected a hint of bitterness, but the fragrant aroma of apples diluted its impact. It was her first time tasting such an exquisite drink. The baijiu mixed with milk was milder, almost devoid of bitterness. She could sense that besides milk, there was probably a touch of honey or sugar added to it. The sweetness and the aroma of the alcohol blended together, creating an entirely new flavor. Finally, when it was time for the last glass, she took a small sip. A scorching sensation immediately rolled over her tongue and down her throat, just as she had expected. With no other flavors to interfere, only the pure taste of the baijiu remained. It started with a fiery heat and then transitioned into a sweetness hidden beneath the bitterness. Roland smiled, knowing that this glass was not the most intense baijiu. There was still room to enhance its richness. He would let Evelyn taste it later, and she was eagerly anticipating it. Once the wineglasses and plates were cleared, the prince ordered the servants to bring a pile of boxes and place them on the long table. These were small gifts for the adult witches. He hoped that the witches would open the boxes when they returned to their rooms to rest for the night. After dinner, Nightingale carried the box back to her bedroom. Before she had a chance to open it, Lightning, Maisie, Lily, and Rem bounded in, their eyes gleaming as they stared at the box in her hands. These young witches felt that His Highness was biased, not allowing them to drink wine and denying them gifts. When they opened the box, they were greeted by a strange garment that caught everyone's attention. It felt incredibly soft to the touch, made of high-quality silk, but it didn't look like a piece of clothing at all because it was too small. Maisie thought it was a windproof eyewear, while Nightingale unfolded the piece of paper that came with it. It contained instructions and descriptions of the gift. Wendy and Nightingale stood still, momentarily stunned. After reading the letter, the faces of the adult witches turned red. The young witches quickly caught on to the hint, and Wendy, in an unusual display of embarrassment, wore a flushed expression. Only Lightning remained unfazed, her eyes filled with curiosity and envy. She asked Wendy to try it on, sparking Wendy's deep embarrassment. She promptly ushered the 4 of them out before heaving a sigh of relief. Nightingale also felt a tinge of embarrassment. While it was common to receive clothing items from the castle for everyday use, no one had ever felt awkward about it. However, this gift was clearly intended to fit individuals of different sizes. In other words, Roland had carefully observed each person's measurements.
Yeah, boy.
The thought made her blush furiously. Nightingale seemed to have an idea. She dissipated into the mist, passed through the walls, and made her way to Anna's room. The door was quickly opened, revealing Anna in her robe. Once Nightingale entered the room and closed the door behind her, she asked about the gift from His Highness. Surprisingly, Anna was delighted and said she had already put it on and found it very comfortable. She asked Nightingale if she wanted to take a look. Nightingale hurriedly waved her hand, asking and stuttering if it wasn't strange for His Highness to give such a gift. Anna, puzzled, explained that His Highness intended to promote it as a product. The item was soft, lightweight, and comfortable. Nightingale couldn't help but marvel inwardly. She hadn't paid attention to these small details but had instead focused on His Highness's goals. Perhaps that was what set her apart, her purity and directness. With these thoughts in mind, Nightingale returned to her room, studied the gift for a while, and then put it on herself. Wendy still hesitated to put it on, but Nightingale teased her that His Highness probably made these designed specifically for her. She pulled Wendy into the mist to try it on.
Okay.
Sylvie felt that she had witnessed more extraordinary events today than in the past few years. From the pipes that released water with just a flick of a switch, to the soap that exuded a faint fragrance, and the wine that burned like fire when consumed. Everything seemed incredible. Of course, the most unbelievable thing was the garment given after dinner. Such clothing was usually exchanged between lovers, yet according to His Highness, he not only wanted to give these clothing to the witches but also planned to promote it and popularize it in the Western Territories. Sylvie couldn't help but shudder. What noble would choose to personally engage in such a business? Or was it that he truly had an unusual interest towards boing-boings and cakes? Sylvie couldn't help but recall Ash's warning, and she involuntarily stepped back a step. Ash was right. His Highness was a dangerous person, and if possible, it would be better for her to keep her distance from him. A week later, Roland spread out the blueprint in his hand. He officially launched the construction project for the steel bridge. He explained to Lien how to raise 2 pieces of land in the middle of the river to serve as the foundation for the bridge piers. Wendy was also on the boat, but over the past week, whenever she saw the prince, she would slightly avert her gaze, appearing somewhat uncomfortable. She stretched her arms and realized that her shoulders no longer hurt, and her arms were no longer sore. She wanted to find an opportunity to thank His Highness. Next, they would dig out some grooves and fill them with cement, repeating the process until a cement wall was formed that penetrated the bottom of the riverbed. Carl thought this idea was incredibly clever. This way, even if the river water washed away the outer layer of soil, it would be blocked by the solid cement wall. Before long, a mass of grayish-green mud emerged to the surface of the water, appearing soft and emitting an awful smell that caused everyone to cover their noses. However, in Roland's eyes, this was excellent fertilizer. Over the centuries, the remains of fish and other aquatic creatures, water plants, and human waste had gradually accumulated in the soil. He hoped to utilize it someday. Sonny looked at the wheat in his hand, which had been nourished with organic fertilizer, and saw that its quantity had doubled, and the grains had grown larger. He had initially become a knight to escape his peasant identity, but within a few months, he had turned from a knight to a prisoner and then inexplicably ended up working in the town hall. Now, he was starting to enjoy this job more and more. The first batch of wheat planted in the border town has finally reached the day of harvest. The serfs, under the scorching sun, use sickles to cut the wheat stalks, bundling them up and transporting them to the other side of the river. In the afternoon, Barav excitedly rushed into the office. According to the preliminary statistics from the municipal hall, the yield per acre of each assigned field is at least 4 times higher than before, with the highest currently reaching 6 times. Barav's expression appears even more ecstatic than Roland's. With just an additional 2,000 farmers, the town will be able to meet the food consumption needs of 50 to 60,000 people. It's simply unbelievable. In this era, the main reason for the inability to increase urban population is the low agricultural productivity. Even a large city like the capital, with a population of over 20,000, requires dozens of surrounding villages to provide food for its residents. Roland hopes to enter mechanized farming early, where the output of a single person will be enough to feed tens of thousands of people in the future. The significant achievement of a bountiful harvest in the border town today, without the promotion and application of agricultural technology and machinery, was only able to achieve mainly attributed to Leif's amazing work. In the evening, Roland gave a speech from a high platform, and it felt like time had returned to that dusk 4 months ago. The roaring bonfire, the densely packed crowd, and the last remnants of sunlight reflected on their faces were all familiar sights. However, what was different this time was the expressions on their faces. Instead of the initial fear and unease, now they were filled with the joy of a bountiful harvest and undeniable anticipation. Roland didn't introduce himself or waste time with pleasantries.
He went straight to the point. He declared that everyone present could become free citizens.
Once they became free citizens, they had the freedom to choose whether to continue farming or seek other occupations.
The list of promotions would be announced in a couple of days. This simple statement ignited the atmosphere at the gathering.
People couldn't contain their excitement and started shouting and cheering. Furthermore, starting from next year, as long as the harvest meets the promotion standards, even if the yield doesn't rank at the top, individuals can still become free citizens. In other words, as long as they work diligently, they can definitely shed their status as serfs.
Roland paused for a moment and looked around.
I hope that one day in the future, there will be no more serfs in Border Town.
Everyone will become true citizen of the border town.
The moment Roland's words faded away, the cheers of the people echoed through the sky above the Redwater River, continuing without end.
Timothy walked into the arched dome at the top of tower in Bluewater Harbor.
Step by step, he approached the desk and sat down in the oversized chair.
Leaning forward, he pressed his face against the tabletop and took a gentle sniff, as a faint, pleasant fragrance entered his nostrils. At that moment, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. He had finally won.
Garcia had given up Bluewater Harbor, giving up the southern frontier, which also meant giving up the throne of Grey Castle. The knight guarding outside pushed the door open and entered.
Timothy would depart for the capital tomorrow morning.
Aside from the personal guard and the knights of Grey Castle, he left the rest of the knights and mercenaries under the command of this knight commander. Timothy ordered him to guard the southern frontier well, ensuring that the Sand tribes would not set foot on Grey Castle's territory again.
The young knight hesitated, and Timothy knew what he was thinking.
He reassured him that as soon as the matter in Bluewater Harbor was resolved, he would immediately recall him to the capital.
The young knight mustered the courage to ask Timothy if there was any news about his brother.
The knight's words caused Timothy to pause for a moment. Indeed, it had been 2 months since his brother was sent to plunder the western frontier, and there had been no news. Timothy, with his back turned to the young knight, stated that his brother must have returned to the capital ahead of them. He then ordered the young knight to burn everything that belonged to Garcia, including this building. He wanted everyone in the southern frontier to know that Garcia's lair no longer existed. He also wanted those who had used the pills but didn't die on the battlefield to be killed. Staying behind in the border town, safely withstood the month of the demons, defeating Duke Ryan, and capturing the Changu stronghold, even causing the complete loss of contact with the 1,500 militiamen of Raymond.
How did he manage to do all this? Timothy never delved deep into understanding his younger brother.
Whether it was Garcia or Jylan, they never enjoyed playing with him when they were young. Undoubtedly, something must have happened to him after he arrived in Border Town, leading to the changes he had undergone.
Regardless of what he encountered, the population and location of Border Town is predetermined that he had nowhere else to run.
With no harbor or fleet and the impassable wilderness behind him, Roland could only hold that corner, waiting for his army to march and trampling onto his territory.
Are you sure about that?
Through the dimly lit corridor, Maine stood before the sacred shrine. Pope Oberlin, now aware of Heather's message, fell into a lengthy silence, exhaling a deep sigh. He had seen Heather growing up.
Oberlin inquired about Garcia and the kingdom of Wolfheart, as well as the new poison.
Maine responded, stating that it had proven remarkably effective in conquering Fong-Tooth Fortress. The defending forces held out for a month before perishing, and the Judgment Army swiftly breached the city walls. The residential areas were devoid of life, but when it came to the assault on Wolfheart City, the poison seemed to have lost its effect.
Presently, the enemy's resistance remained stubbornly resilient.
Oberlin quickly identified 2 mistakes made by Maine. Firstly, he should have launched the attack during the initial peak of the plague, seizing the opportunity to swiftly treat the afflicted residents with medication, thus significantly reducing their animosity and gain more church followers. Attacking a month later might have minimized casualties, but it also provided the enemy with ample time to react and discover a way to counteract the spread of the plague.
Secondly, Maine should not have been overly concerned about the losses suffered by the Judgment Army and the God Punishment Army.
Maine lowered his head in deep sorrow. Oberlin gently tapped his shoulder with his scepter and then offered him some words of comfort. He informed Maine that Garcia and the king of the Wolf Heart Kingdom had gathered in one place, presenting an opportunity for the church. It was a chance to capture them all at once. Oberlin stood up and motioned for Maine to follow him. Guided by the guards, Maine walked alongside the Pope, slowly making their way deeper into the dungeon. The enormous stone of God punishment emitted a faint glow, illuminating the path beneath their feet. The guards ignited their torches, casting flickering light, revealing several towering iron frames standing alongside the stone pathway. Among the dusty air, a canvas covered in dust came into view. It rose high, clearly concealing a colossal object beneath it. Originally meant to be revealed in the final 2 years, the ultimate weapon now needed to be activated ahead of schedule. Maine could hardly believe his eyes. It was a massive, grotesque four-wheeled iron carriage, with a single wheel taller than his own stature. It lacked a carriage compartment, instead featuring terrifying metal ramming horns and skeletal frames. At the center of the frame, a spiky bone shield was mounted, as large as 3 or 4 door panels combined. 2 straight iron rods, one on each side, protruded from the shield's openings, pointing forward like poised arrows. This weapon could only be activated through the use of magic and required the presence of 3 or 4 witches to operate it properly. The following words from Oberlin nearly caused Maine to stumble and fall to the ground. It originated from the church's enemy, the demons from hell. Oberlin cautioned that this weapon must never be seen by the common folk. To assist him, Oberlin would dispatch 2 pure ones. Oberlin assured Maine that no one could escape from their hands. Pure ones under the Pope's command. Maine's heart trembled. The witches nurtured and raised by the church were known as pure ones, but the witches under the Pope's authority were the selected elite, the strongest among them. Meanwhile, in Border Town, Roland held the first high-level meeting of the Border Town in the castle's reception hall. Everyone was actively reporting on their work. Compared to the initial days when the scene was supported by only Berev and his 10 apprentices, the municipal hall had now expanded into a massive group of nearly 100 people. Among them were impoverished nobles, captured knights and their retinues, as well as native residents who had completed their elementary education. The attendees of the first high-level meeting were all the highest-ranking officials of their respective departments. Sonny applied to construct a mill next to the Crimson Water River, and Roland approved the request, instructing Sonny to first submit an application to the municipal hall. Once the funding was granted, they could work with the Department of Construction to develop a detailed plan. Additionally, Sonny also brought a promotion list of serfs, which included a staggering 516 individuals. Next came the Education Department, where Scroll reported that a total of 85 individuals had completed their elementary education. Following that was the Chemical Engineering Department. Kyle's first statement was that he hoped His Highness could find a true representative as soon as possible. He expressed his dislike for being in a leadership position and attending meetings. Roland rolled his eyes secretly. Since becoming a lord, he had learned to selectively ignore certain remarks. Kyle then began his report, mentioning that the laboratory was short-staffed. Fortunately, 5 individuals had recently joined, all of them young but clever, and they had completed their elementary education. The chief alchemist Kyle, in particular, seemed to have a disrespectful attitude and choice of words. However, considering his age and his enthusiasm for chemical experiments, Roland didn't feel much resentment. After all, when Kyle experienced the explosion accident and was completely healed by Nanoa, his first reaction was to conduct experiments without any constraints. He even planned to taste the flavors of different acidic solutions. Such fervent enthusiasm was truly unrivaled. The fourth person to report was Minister Carl from the Department of Construction. He provided an update on the major projects and construction work in Border Town. The next person was Axe,